This is a very important note just so you don't create a loop in your network. Only the main mesh node can be wired into your network. The rest of the nodes or satellites need to be Wi-Fi only. Do not loop the satellites back into your main network using a network cable. You can plug things into the back of the satellites like Xboxes, PC, cameras and other things, but do not plug the satellites back into the original network because it will just create a broadcast loop and your network will stop working. Unlike the Zyxel Mesh firmware, which tries to identify whether it should be using Wi-Fi or Ethernet for the network backhaul, the 802.11s function on OpenWRT does not do this and will just create a network loop. Hello everyone, this is a video on how to use OpenWRT in a wireless mesh configuration with these Zyxel Multy M1 devices, otherwise known as model number WSM20. These things I have found to be phenomenally unreliable in their Zyxel stock configuration. If you look in the description of this video, there is a video on how to take off the stock firmware on these devices and put on OpenWRT. And once you've done that, they will just be individual routers on their own, so individual Ethernet routers, or you could use them as, I guess, an access point where they're all wired back to a central wired network. But if you wanted to recreate the meshing function that the Zyxel software or firmware had, where you can have a main one plugged into your main router, and then these other ones in other places around the house where you don't have network connectivity or an Ethernet cable, and you wanted to pick up the Wi-Fi signal and transmit it again, this video will show you how to do that using a function that's built into OpenWRT called 802.11s for Sierra. The configuration I will use will have this, essentially the main one, and I will have it configured as the as a bridge, or essentially an access point only with meshing enabled. If you wanted to have this as your main router, so you can use OpenWRT that's already on this now as the routing operating system, then what you need to do is ignore the IP address and DHCP and IPv6 settings that I will change on this main router. Right, what I'm going to do is move the video around so that you've got the screenshot of my laptop and also hopefully this video where you can see what I'm plugging in on these devices. So the far right hand one will be my main one, the middle one will be the first hop or the first node in the mesh, and the far one will be another node in the mesh as well. So back of the first one, in the WAN port, I have my internet connection, which is this yellow cable that goes into the lowest port, the WAN port, and then this white cable goes off from one of the three remaining LAN ports to my laptop. On the laptop, because we are in routed mode, so this is where if you didn't want to have it as a bridge and you wanted to use it as a router, it's on 192.168.1.1, and what I would like to have, let me bring up another command prompt here, are these devices to be on my LAN, my main LAN range of 10.0.0, and they're going to be on 10.0.0.40.41 and .42. So by the end of this video we should have all three of these remaining ping boxes should be responding to pings. So let's go over to the web browser and do 192.168.1.1. Whoops, might help if I could type properly. And we bring up the first device's OpenWRT interface. If you followed my other video on installing the OpenWRT software, you probably will already have these two, that entry there and that entry there, will be enabled because you will have enabled Wi-Fi. So I'm going to mimic that setup and call that my home network, my home Wi-Fi. And under security I will give it WPA2 because I definitely have some devices that do not like WPA3 in the house, and I'm going to give it the password Oliver 90. I'll also do the same for the 5, so that's for the 2.4 gigahertz up there, and I'm going to do exactly the same for the 5 gigahertz. So at this point, once I press on enable, we will be, on both of those, we will be in the same situation as the kind of stock setup of how my firmware flashing video of OpenWRT onto these is. Right now we can connect to my home Wi-Fi with the password Oliver90. It will go into this, it will go off onto the internet with that yellow cable. Because I have a wider, bigger LAN, I do want these to be into bridge mode. So if you do not want bridge mode, do not follow this next set of instructions, and I'll tell you when I'm done with that. So I'm going to go into network and then interfaces. Going to click on edit on LAN, and I'm going to give it a static IP address of 10.0.0.40. I'm going to change the subnet mask because I have a wider subnet mask. And go to DHCP server, ignore this interface because I don't want this to be handing out DHCP on my LAN because I already have a DHCP server. Also under IPv6 settings, I need to go into RA service and change that to disabled, and IPv6 DHCP v6 service I also need to set to disabled because again I already have IPv6 on my LAN being routed and announced and DHCP'd via another device on my network, so I do not want that to be occurring on my LAN. I will save that, and I will then save and apply. Where I go back to the command WAN socket, it now needs to be plugged into the LAN socket. I now need to move the connections around, so that is what I've just moved it over to. My laptop is now able to ping the main access point on the mesh node on 10.0.0.40. So back to the web browser, I now need to visit that IP address and log back in. Now we are on to the configuration of the mesh network. So if you had skipped, or you were skipping that step because you wanted it to be a router still rather than a bridge or just an access point, now at this point you need to start following my instructions again to do the mesh node. We can have the mesh backhaul on the 2.4 gigahertz, but that will restrict your speed. You will want to add it on this second option here, the ACAX-N network, which is the 5 gigahertz, which will give you quicker backhaul. We need to, so we've already configured our home Wi-Fi network of my home Wi-Fi and the password Oliver90. We now need to click on, actually I will take a note of that just before I start because I'm highly likely to forget that that's the name. We now need to click on add on this 5 gigahertz line and scroll down where it says mode access point. We need to add an 802.11s mode network, and we need to give that network an ID. Nobody sees this ID when looking at a list of wireless networks. It's like the hidden backhaul ID that allows all of these 3 devices to talk to each other, and you could have another 3 of these devices somewhere else in the house with a different mesh ID, and they would all talk to each other and they wouldn't cross-talk across both of them. So you can use the mesh ID to be something unique, which will be your network ID that these use to organize themselves. So I'm going to call this one random mesh ID 444554 GGHJK. Basically any word that nobody else in the area is likely to be using. And I'm going to take a note of that because I will need that when I come to configure the other ones. By default, it will not be bound to any of the network ports, so we need to go where it says network and tick LAN, which will bind it to or allow the traffic to flow to the LAN and then out onto the network. Also, you probably want to go into the wireless security and change it from being no encryption to being WPA3 SAE. You won't be able to select WPA2, you'll get a big warning about it not being supported. So yeah, WPA3 SAE, and then give it a good secure password, because if somebody knows your mesh ID or can sniff it, you will want a good WPA3 password so that people can't just join their own nodes to your network. So I'm just going to mash the keyboard, which is probably as random as it can be. And we can now save that network. So you'll see underneath the 5 GHz entry here, we now have our home Wi-Fi network, which you'll be able to see in the list of wireless networks. We've also got this mesh network, which we are about to save the settings on to enable that. So save and apply. So what we've got now is this configured as a bridge, or as essentially an access point only, with a mesh node on it and my wireless network called My Home Wi-Fi. I'm now going to move my network cable for my laptop from the one I've now finished configuring onto the first node that I guess maybe the second node or the first satellite that I would like to configure. So the white network cable off to my laptop comes out, and I'll plug it into any of the 3 upper network sockets on this node. You could do this on the other side of your house. These just happen to all be next to each other for the ease of filming. There's no reason why you'd need to have them all next to each other to configure them initially. Now I'm plugged in. It's responding on 192.168.1.1, which is the factory default of this. We need to log into it, and because again it's just going to be exactly the same as it's going to be exactly the same as this was in factory mode, so we need to turn off the DHCP and we need to turn off the IPv6 router announcements. So we need to go into interface or network and then interfaces, edit on the LAN. This is my first of the satellites, so I'm going to give that 10.0.0.41. Again, my custom subnet. And onto DHCP server, ignore the interface, and IPv6 settings needs to be RA mode disabled and DHCP v6 service disabled. Save on that. Note that we will still be responding on 1.1 until I click on save and apply. I'm going to change all of the other wireless settings as well, and then we will apply the settings. So network and then wireless. Once again, I need to configure my home network onto this, so I need to click on the 2.4, edit, scroll down, call that one My Home Wi-Fi, go to Wireless Security, WPA2 for this, Oliver 90, save, click on Edit on the 5 GHz entry as well, same, whoops, that didn't copy, same details on that one. And before I again save and apply all of this, I am going to add the mesh node as well. So I need to click on Add on that 5 GHz section here. The second section down, I need to click on Add. Scroll down where it's got access point as the mode, change that to 802.11s, and then we need to fill in the same details that we filled in on the main node. So that's the name of it. I need to associate it with the LAN, and under wireless security we need to change that to WPA3 SAE and give it the same exact key or password, and then click on save. I think we're now ready to save and apply that. I noticed that it's gone a bit weird and doubled up. This 5 GHz one. It's a bit unusual. I'm going to click on Enable and just see whether stuff works as expected. So when I click on Enable here, that's the same as scrolling down and also clicking Save and Apply. So let's see what happens. I'm going to click on Enable now, and we'd expect it to stop responding on 1.1, and I would hope that soon after I will see a response from .41, which is the IP address I gave this node that I'm plugged into, and indeed now through the wireless network. So these two are not wired into the same network. The only cable that is in the back of this one here is the cable off to my laptop. This is now talking wirelessly to this node here, and then off to the rest of the internet. So if I ping the internet, I now have internet access, hopping network into this, Wi-Fi over to this, and off onto the internet. We now need to configure the third and final node, and then you could just repeat this process for each of the nodes that you want to add. I'm not sure what the maximum that you can have is, but if somebody does find out, let me know. So we can now unplug from this middle node and plug into the final one, any of the upper 3 network sockets on the back of it. That's plugged in, and we should see that we will be responding on 192.168.1.1, because once again this third and final one is all back into default settings. So it will again need all of that initial setup that I did before. So I need to go network interfaces on LAN, click on edit. I need to give it the final IP address 42, subnet mask of 255.255.254.0, and that's only because I have a larger IP space on my network. Most people won't want to change that. DHCP server, we want to ignore the interface, and IPv6 routing IPv6 settings disabled on the RA service and disabled on DHCP v6. Off to wireless, so network and then wireless, and the same process we did with the middle router we need to do on this one. Click on edit on the 2.4 GHz, give it my wireless network name and the desired password, and again on the 5 GHz, edit on that one, my network name and the desired password. And now we're on to the mesh backhaul. So I want to add the mesh backhaul on the 5 GHz once again. Scroll down, change the mode to 802.11s, fill in the Mesh ID, go over to wireless security, and once again make sure that we select or fill in exactly the same as what we filled in on the other one. So we're WPA3, SAE, and save. And I think we're ready to go. Weirdly, this middle one hasn't, this final one hasn't added or duplicated that that entry there. Probably because I clicked on edit a second time or something, and it messed up the GUI. So, as I say, clicking on Save and Apply is going to do exactly the same as clicking on Enable on this one, except when I click on Enable it will also enable that Wi-Fi name. So I'm going to click on Enable. If you do look down this list, once you've set them all up and one of these is set to disabled, you will want to click on Enable, because it means that it won't be transmitting on that band, so it might not be transmitting on the 2.4. So yeah, Enable. And here goes. Let's see whether we end up with all three online and access to the internet. So 1.1 has stopped responding, and I'm going to start pinging the internet. That one doesn't appear to have worked as smoothly as the others. I will unplug my network cable and plug it back in, just in case for some reason my laptop hasn't refreshed its IP address. No, well, that one has not worked as well. Some impromptu troubleshooting time. So I need to go into the network settings and force an IP address so that I'm actually then able to get back into the web interface of this router. So let's do 10.0. Oops. Check that the IP address I want to use is actually free. Yep, I can use .39 on my network. And I don't need a gateway or DNS because I'm only going to access this router very temporarily. So we can see we've got a response from the reconfigured final node, but for some reason we do not have backhaul to the rest of the network. Let's try and figure out why that might be. So let's go network and wireless. So interestingly, in the status it is able to see and even report on the other two nodes being available, and it's communicating with one of them, but I'm not sure why I'm not getting any traffic. Oh, have I? Here we go. So this is a very easy mistake to make, I think. What I've done here, if I go into edit on this mesh node entry, I've forgotten to associate it with LAN, is what I hope I have done. Yes, here we go. So network is unspecified. I need that to be part of my LAN network. Save. Scroll down. Save and apply, and almost certainly that will have been my issue. There we go. So there you could see in the web interface that the physical radio layer was connected and could see the other nodes, but I was not able to access the network across it because I hadn't bound it or associated it with the LAN. It was just a floating mesh connectivity that didn't know where it was supposed to pass traffic. So, data was coming in on the Wi-Fi and would go nowhere, and data that was coming in on the network into this node here would also not go out on that wireless mesh node. So we're now good. We have access to the internet, and I can ping all three of these OpenWRT Multi M1 wireless mesh nodes. So that's quite a good result. So what I could now do is unplug my laptop and plug it directly into the first node again. And then these two I can unplug and move them around the house, put them into another location. Make sure that that location is midpoint between where you want good reception and where your router already is. You don't want to put it all the way really far away, because you will be picking up and repeating a really bad low signal. You will want to midpoint, so it's picking up a good signal and repeating a good signal. The other things that are good to know is if you are, for example, in the UK and you have Virgin Media, this router, this main one here, with OpenWRT on it, will be infinitely more capable, reliable and better than the Virgin Media router. So you would want to put your Virgin Media router into bridge mode, and then on this one, on the main one, you would leave this in routing mode, so that you have a very good competent router rather than the Virgin Media router, and that will just become a bridge between the cable network and this router, doing sensible routing and NAT and configuration and port forwards and everything else. If you didn't watch the entire video on putting OpenWRT on this, or if you've done it using the instructions on the OpenWRT website, I would advise looking at the end of my video on how to put OpenWRT on it, because if you've got a gigabit broadband service, your speed will probably be limited to around 700 or 800 megabits per second, unless you've gone into the OpenWRT admin firewall pages and enabled software and potentially hardware offload, which will improve the performance of your internet. Hopefully that video has been really helpful to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thanks very much.